You've discovered the Technoprogressive Hub. Join us to fight for a high-tech and radically democratic future. Speaking today with RJ Eskow. RJ is a journalist, broadcaster, policy consultant, and commentator, best known as the host and managing editor of The Zero Hour, which is a nationally syndicated radio and television program that blends current affairs with in-depth interviews on policy. Before his media career, Eskow worked for decades as a senior executive and advisor in health insurance, social benefits, worker comp, foundations, governments, private entities. He's also had a long track record in political communications and progressive advocacy. He served as lead writer and editor of Bernie Sanders' 2015-16 presidential campaign. He was among the founding writers of the Huffington Post, and his commentary and analysis have appeared in The Nation, Salon, The Intercept, Los Angeles Times, and American Prospect. He has held positions as a senior fellow with Social Security Works and the Campaign for America's Future. And he serves on the IET Board of Directors. And I'm so glad to have him with us today. RJ.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks, Jay.
I'm giving a talk for Future Day, which is coming up March 3rd, I guess. My talk is titled How Billionaires Ruined Futurism. It sounds like you and I have been on a similar mode recently. So it's also been on your mind about the effect of billionaires, and it's pretty central to our discussion today because we are at that intersection of ideas that are now associated with billionaires. But how do you see the problem?
Well, it's first of all, it's a great question. But secondly, I always go back to the post-war era when I was, let's say, in the 1950s, I wasn't very cognizant of what was going on a little bit. I watched TV, but in the 1960s, for example, I was a little nerd fascinated with the future, as opposed to now when I'm an aged nerd fascinated with the future. And so I always point to what I call the Jetsons effect, that it was generally assumed that the premise of the Jetsons cartoon series, which I think came out in 1965, was valid. And the premise was this, that first of all, it was a quote unquote typical, i.e. white middle class family of four projected into the future with a single wage earner, George Jetson. But the premise was that George Jetson worked 3 hours a week at a factory, Spacely Sprockets, and by working 3 hours a week, he earned enough money to finance a home for four people in a saucer-shaped dome on top of a spire reaching into space, a flying saucer convertible car. I'm not sure how that works in terms of safety, a robot maid, and all the accoutrements that go along with it. Because in 1965, the post-war economic growth of the United States was such that any technological advance, bearing in mind that they were as concerned about automation, as it was known then, as we are about AI today, displacing workers, they felt that, and it was just commonly assumed that any productivity gains and efficiency gains would be shared between workers and employers, because from 1945 to 1965, GDP growth, gross domestic product growth, had grown, had the profits thereof, the benefits thereof, that you can see the graphs, they grew together for employer profits and employee wages. And then around 1968, they bifurcated, and employer profits kept soaring, and employee real wages kind of tapered off. There was this dramatic split, and then there were, the Reagan administration, other things that emphasized that and sealed that. But in the mid 1960s, as I'm sure you know, but one of the major problems people were struggling with academics anyway, was what to do with all that leisure time the American worker is going to have when our jobs are automated. Then we only have to work. I mean, none of them were as ambitious as the Jetsons, but let's say we only have to work 12 hours a week instead of the requisite 40. What will people do with their time? The sociologist David Reisman wrote about the coming crisis of leisure, which was a widely held belief that there would be a crisis of leisure. I have collected op-eds and editorials from the New York Times talking about the inevitable, even news articles from mainstream newspapers talking about, well, when the work week drops to 32 hours a week, which it's certain to do, the news in a news article, not an opinion article, by 1970, and then perhaps to 28 and further down, people will have to blah, blah, blah. There was a proposal for a Department of Leisure to deal with all this extra time because it was believed in a country with strong unions and strong wage growth and the growth of a prosperous middle class that things would would continue to go along the same trajectory, which of course is one of the biggest problems people have when they make mistakes about the future, assuming the trajectories won't change. Flash forward to today, it's just assumed that the trajectory of the last 50 years will happen going forward. So we don't use the word automation as much now. We use AI and robotics. But the idea is assumed by policymakers from both parties. What will we do when all these people lose their jobs because of AI? That was an unthinkable idea in the 1960s. Hey, everybody, but today it's just like, sorry, pal, you're out of work. Sorry.
It wasn't unthinkable. I mean, I don't.
Well, it wasn't unthinkable, but it was not the prevailing mode of discourse.
I'm sure you remember the Committee of 300, headed up by Heilbronner, as I remember, who wrote to LBJ and said, we think automation's coming and we need to get prepared.
Yeah, there were concerns, but the general feeling was, I mean, LBJ's labor secretary, whose name I'm blanking on at the moment, was one of the, he was involved with the commission, but he was also very outspoken about making sure that these rewards were equally shared. And, there were counter proposals, for example, splitting jobs between two people becoming much easier with technology. And so that could reduce the unemployment problem, that sort of thing. There wasn't enough attention paid to racial disparities in employment. There should have been more, but there was some. I am oversimplifying a little, but not by much. Yeah. And but we flash forward, and it's now assumed that the future belongs to the wealthy, and that everybody else is out of luck. So much so that ideas like technoprogressivism or transhumanism, or which we could talk about more, but is essentially a value neutral term politically, means you're in the camp of the billionaires, partly because billionaires seem to be the ones talking about it the most.
They want to sell it to us.
They want to sell theirs to us, right? And so that's a big piece of it. But also, I think we've started, I'm trying to think of the best way to put this, but we've narrowed our vision of the future to a strictly technological one. We don't think about, well, how could the family be made a more equitable unit for everybody in it? We don't think about how do we restore the rights of workers. That's a future question too. will technology enable us to have collectively run worker-owned organizations as major corporations? These are all valid questions for the future, but our social imaginations have fallen behind our technological imaginations, number one. So we only think of the future as a technological experience, and we only think of technology as belonging to the private sector, which is now far more unequal than it was back then. I also, by the way, when my grandmother died and I was unpacking her things years ago, I found a newspaper she packed something in a 1962 newspaper where Harriet Truman was gently chiding President John F. Kennedy for allowing private corporations to have a role in the new communication satellite system they were planning. And old Harry was, I'm not a big fan or detractor of, but he was like, I'm sure the president understands that corporations shouldn't have a role in, in the communication technology of the future. Also totally unthinkable nowadays. We just assume if you're talking about technology, you're talking about Elon Musk owning Starlink, you're talking about, the big 4 or 5 owning all social media, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Let's stop there for a second, because I think we're old lefties. And so one of the questions from an old lefty perspective is, and it's central to my own social democratic way of thinking about the 20th century, is that class struggle after World War II, there was a social democratic compact in the industrialized countries, more or less, that we could have we could have labor peace through union contracts. We could have social democratic redistribution of the growing post-war largesse. And that began to fall apart in the 70s for some reason, that post-Fordist compact that we had.
Right.
And there's a variety of reasons that it could have fallen apart. But one is concentration of capital, which certainly is a part of our current media consolidation story and the growing ideological hegemony. But another is what I think is sometimes called capitalist realism, Mark Fisher's idea that
right.
We just lost the idea that we could do anything any differently. And capitalism became the horizon of our future. And as a consequence, if there was going to be a brighter future, it was going to be sold to us by one capitalist or the other. And so, where do you see the breakup of the social democratic compact coming from? Was it just the weakness of the balance of forces? The decline of unions was a part of the story, that we just didn't have the union strength anymore to push for certain kinds of social policies. The idea about Piketty's that the social democratic parties got captured by middle class, college educated people with middle class concerns, and we lost the blue collars. Where do you see that whole set of things happening?
Well, of course, those are all causality questions in a way, right? I mean, did the unions decline because of the loss of the social democratic vision, or did we lose the social democratic vision, the unions decline? I would say, it's a great question, obviously not a simple one, but I would say fundamentally, first of all, it's in the nature of capital to want to accumulate. It's just the way capitalism works. It is relentless in that regard. It's like rust, right? Rust never sleeps, as Neil Young would say. And so it was in the nature of capital to always want to do this I'm anthropomorphizing it, but that's the gist of it. Nature of capitalists always want to do this. So they got busy. And I would argue that the social democratic forces in the US and Western Europe did not. They were kind of asleep at the switch. And I think that's a huge piece of it. We had developed a union movement, and FDR, his presidency was the closest we've ever come to a social democratic vision in this country. But he was prompted not only by the Depression, but by the growth of the communist movement, the independent labor movement, the Townsend clubs wanting a Social Security, million independent forces. So in the absence of all that, the social democratic movement lost vision, lost cohesion. Capitalism intruded into academia very systematically. We have the Lewis Powell memo in 1970 and so on, very systematically into specifically economics, which had never had the role it has today as an exalted role as a policy driver. It was never thought, well, you just defer to what the economic formula tell you. And the economic formula are ideological creations to a large extent. So that was those factors were a big piece of it. And then, of course, the intrusion of this rapidly unequal and maldistributed centers of wealth further into the political process, co-opting our so-called social democratic political party in a two-party system, which reached its peak with the rise of Bill Clinton, so that the Democratic Party, I've written about this actually for The Nation, so that the Democratic Party really, in the last 40 years, if you go through like business school models of the evolution of corporations, it's very easy to compare the Democratic Party of the last 30, 40 years to a corporate entity. It has revenue, it had its customer base, it had its product, with voters being the product, not the customers, and so on. So you had that. You didn't have a electoral alternative. The union movement had been decimated by a series of laws and moves, and the Democratic Party failed to support it. Stopped supporting it in a very meaningful way. So here we are.
Where were you with the old alignment argument in DSA that there's a social democratic party trapped inside the Democratic Party, and that part of our job as progressives is to organize it and liberate it from the corporate forces?
Well, first of all, I'm not a partisan on that one. I'm more
You're not partisan to the Democrats.
I'm not a partisan to the divide within the DSA or the left, socialist left in general, about with the do we work within the Democrats or outside the Democratic Party? My answer to that is yes, we do. We have, for example, a pretty left-leaning populist candidate for Senate in Nebraska who was an independent who won 45% of the vote. That was a good opportunity. We saw Ron Mamdani winning by being a Democrat in New York City. That was a good way to go. I think, I always tell my social democratic friends who are working to reform the party, because I think it has a role to play, that they should be, their relationship to the party should be what the Bible advised. I'm not a big Bible quoter, but what the Bible advised Christians to be with the world, which is be in it, but not of it. If you want to use the Democratic Party as a vehicle for change and you're in a situation like Zoran, where that would work, yeah, go for it. But just don't internalize the oppressor consciousness of the Democrat. Don't become more of a Democrat once you're in office than you are, a democratic socialist or leader for change.
Mm-hmm. Our dilemma as the IET is that within progressive politics, I would argue since World War II, there's been an anti-technology turn, and that it relates to what you started with, which is that the moment that we're at historically, visions of a brighter, better, wealthier future are usually being sold to us by the right or by people out of capitalism, as opposed to the post-capitalists, people like Paul Mason and others who've argued that automation could be turned into a progressive direction. We're trying to, with the Technoprogressive Project, raise that flag. But how, where do you see us in relationship to this backlash against the tech oligarchs? Is the idea, one of the reasons why we've been promoting the term technoprogressivism is because our judgment, or some of our judgments, was that transhumanism was a term that, even though it was philosophically defensible, was now associated with these right-wing oligarchs. Is that, do you think a lot of futurism is carrying that burden now? And is there any hope that it can be rescued?
Well, I think, first of all, yes, a lot of futurism is carrying that burden right now. And I think we're not, I was thinking before we connected to today, Jay, that about, gosh, it must have been almost 25 years ago now. I gave a talk to Humanity Plus conference, and which you will recall from the old days, the H Plus conferences.
Yeah.
Where I talked about how we're all transhumanist, whether we admit it or not. The first person who got a good day's work done in the 15th century because they had coffee for the first time was a transhumanist. They were enhancing their neurochemistry with a technological breakthrough that had just been provided. We're all transhumanists in light of our former selves. So I think one of our problems, I think, was that we just made ourselves look a little weird to some people, and I don't mean to, embarrass any of us, but I just think that was a problem. The bigger problem is, I think that, and we need to be cognizant of this, really conscious of it in our communication, is that people do think, they do assume that it will be billionaire run, corporate run, venture fund run, whatever it is. So if you say to somebody, you know what, AI, now I personally am a skeptic about the consciousness side of AI. I don't think we have anything like the technology to make that happen, but
ever or just right yet?
With what we know now, I will never say never about technology because it's just asking for embarrassment, the way technology, because technology is nonlinear advances.
Eventually you painted yourself into one tiny little inch of square.
Right.
This is human. This part's human.
It's not. I mean, my thing is we invented airplanes, but we didn't do it by adding gears to bicycles, so we need some new breakthroughs I'm not saying airplanes are impossible. In fact, bicycle makers made the first airplane, but you got to find some new principles. As far as, but if we were to say, to go back to AI for a second, if I were to say as a techno-progressive, AI can be great for the workers' movement. What I'm likely to hear is, oh yeah, sure, like Elon is going to help us, like Sam Altman is going to help us out. Well, then I've got to go, which is why the first thing I wrote about AI publicly for Current Affairs magazine was how it really ethically should be a socialist system because it's produced by all of us in our online activity. So
I don't know if you've seen Jeff Hinton get interviewed about this, by the way. He's an old British labor guy. And when people ask him how to fix the inequality problems that AI is going to cause, he just says socialism. And they say, anything more? I said, no, just socialism.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, this has now become part of the discourse that Star Trek is clearly a socialist vision because you have the replicators, if it's big enough, I guess you can't fit a big one on a starship, but so I want a 57 Chevy with, mag wheels. It's like, okay, here it is. I've never understood the physics of, there must be raw material somewhere, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's in hyperspace. I don't know. But anyway, so that led to the book Trekonomics, which I enjoyed. And it led to the concept in Britain, really, mostly as a provocation, I think, with fully automated luxury communism, as they call it.
That's funny.
So yes, I mean, I would argue that if by socialism we mean democratic governance and collective ownership of certain technologies, I absolutely believe that because every new technology is first and foremost an engine for inequality unless they're governed that way. I guess I would say, but whether we call it socialism or something else, I guess I would say, getting back to your question about this association between billionaires and technology. I think it's incumbent not on all of us in this sort of techno progressive world, but some of us, and I feel, I feel like I'll take it on. Is to say no. Here are ways that technology can be owned by everyone. I mean, look, in 1969, humanity landed on the moon. That wasn't SpaceX. That wasn't Jeff Bezos's, phallic embarrassment of a Blue Origin rocket. It was, nationalism may not be my big thing, but it was a good old USA. It was not. It was the people. It was but now, even what the Civil Corps of Engineers used to do has been outsourced. So, I think to say to people, some of our greatest achievements have been publicly owned. Tennessee Valley Authority, Rural Electrification Project, I mean, you name it. All of a sudden, people in the hollers and valleys of Appalachia were connected to the world through radio because government built the wires, not private industry, not cable companies, not, I think that's part of the message we have to deliver, or we will be met with this kind of skepticism.
Well, let's pause here because I think this gets to an issue both with socialist theory as well as what's happening currently with technofascism. Every time I try to think about what things the different people that I want to call fascists around the world have in common, the first thing that they have in common is patriarchy or patriarchal restoration. They all hate gender ideology,
right?
And so they're doing that. They're trying to do that. But in terms of economics, there doesn't seem to be much of a through line. You have people like Millet, who's more of a traditional libertarian, and then you have the Putin kind of model, which is you're not really privatizing. You're giving state control to your Siloviki, your powerful allies, and that seems to be more the Trump model, which is he doesn't mind if there's media consolidation and corporate monopoly as long as it's his allies who have the corporate monopolies. Do you think that's the principal purpose of the growing technofascism, just to concentrate power and take it away from workers and citizens so that they can't get in the way?
One of the I shouldn't say great, one of the highly effective aspects of technofascism is its adaptability. So, I mean, the Trump model is perfect for them, no question. And they're taking full advantage of it while they can and grabbing as much as they can, whether it's media power, as you said, or whether it's vacuuming out. I called the Doge's stealing of public data the greatest theft in human history, which in some ways it is, because that's been the holy grail of a untapped data mining resource. Has been public sector, Social Security, Medicare, you name it, IRS, and we're only beginning to learn the magnitude of what they've taken, but they know how to work within a more liberal, neoliberal political structure as well. So they were more than happy to oblige the Biden administration in whether it was suppressing views that I think are anti-science and dangerous, but still I don't think you should use technology to suppress them because I believe in free speech. So during COVID, I think they crossed the line there. Or, the story of the brief period before there was an outcry when the factual information about Hunter Biden's laptop was suppressed. I mean, they'll do what it takes to make friends on either side of the aisle and to contribute money where they need to and flatter whom they need to. So they'll work with whatever you give them.
Yeah, this new pro AI PAC that just got organized, it has two parts. It has the Democrat part and the Republican part because they're going to give money to both sides. Anybody who's pro AI, they're going to support out there. This issue of how to deal with corporate consolidation and the growing technofascism, do you think that what we need to do is argue for socialization of various kinds, or is antitrust, in your mind, is there conflict between an antitrust approach? Because I very much favor people like Cory Doctorow and their emphasis on the corporate consolidation and the need to return to antitrust. But there's also the social idea that when you have corporate consolidation or monopoly, it can establish industrial standards, it can simplify capitalist competition, and then you just need to regulate it on that end and make sure that it works more as a public utility in the public interest, as opposed to trying to reintroduce competition into a system that's already demonstrated that competition doesn't work very well. Are you more on the go that direction or more on the antitrust side?
I'm more of a mix and match person. And by that, I mean, first of all, I think concentration is almost so. It's very hard for me to think of situations. There are some, there have been a couple, but by and large, concentration is more bad than good, I think, in almost every case. I mean, we could debate Bell Telephone, Bell Laboratories in the 60s and so on, but maybe one or two like that. But I am very much on the side of antitrust, less so because I mythologize competition, although I think competition is good, but more so because I think, first of all, monopoly breeds abuse. So I guess that's a side effect of competition. I'm not sure competition will bring prices down very much, but I think it can, when people have someplace to go, when they're abused by vendor A or service A, if they know there's a service B, that will help keep vendor A in check. Two, I mean, the one thing we can say about our information age is if we have new regulations, it's not hard to communicate that to every player, large and small, in the field. So, I mean, I don't think it's we only have to send one registered letter if it's if it's monopolized. I mean, they'll get the message. But I think that where I come down again is on communication. I don't. I have some friends, good friends, people I respect, who work for an organization. I think the name is Better Markets. Well, okay. I mean, I'm with you as far as that goes, but I don't think Better Markets will get us what we need. I think what we need is better democratic input over the process, not markets, but in that sense, I'm more, mixed model socialist. I don't think the market fixes much. I think that avoiding monopoly fixes a lot. Makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely. How about universal basic income? There's been a lot of anxiety this week or last week in Silicon Valley because of various resignations and people saying internally in these companies that they think all white collar jobs are going to be wiped out in the next year. This fits into a narrative of, well, thanks for telling us what the problem is, but do you have any solutions other than just selling us more of your product? But universal basic income is getting talked about more now. Andrew Yang's back on the stump. Do you think that Bernie and the progressive left need to be talking more about that? So far, it's just the anti-AI data center stuff and not as enough. There's Alex Borges in New York, who's a Democrat who's talking about UBI, but there are very few Democrats talking about UBI yet.
Yeah, well, the UBI, it's another one where context is everything, right? Because I wouldn't buy a used UBI proposal from Andrew Yang. But what we saw a lot of, particularly maybe first decade and a half of the 21st century, was tech billionaires proposing UBI. But if you push them at all, it would be, well, instead of the social safety net. And all of a sudden, you've just put 40 million people at risk for survival, their very survival, on systems controlled by billionaires. And that is a really bad idea. So again, as with other types of forward-thinking ideas, people then became reflexively anti-UBI, right? Because they thought, well, no, it's just the way billionaires are trying to screw us.
Or that the billionaires want it because it'll keep capitalism ticking over when the wages go away and people can't buy stuff. That's true, but
it has to do with, one of the most future-thinking, future-oriented, right-wing libertarian thinkers is the economist Tyler Cohen. It looks like Cowan, I think it's pronounced Cohen, who has said his vision of the future is, he said, I'm not saying I like it, which is when a right winger says, I'm not saying I like it, they usually like it. But 85% of the population will become superfluous. And only those people who are above average, hence the phrase average is over, will be productive members of society, which he estimates at 15%, and only 0.01% or 0.1% will have major influence. Which is pretty much a dystopian hellscape. But then what are you going to do with the 85%? Well, you give them a lousy UBI, highly inadequate, but enough for subsistence so that they can buy heroin and stay online all day clicking and feeding data into the LLMs. And that is one vision of UBI, but another vision of UBI. And then there's the debate on the left. The left vision of UBI, of course, is keep the social contract and have a basic income that everyone can
as a complement.
Meet as a complement. Yeah, to meet the other things one needs and wants in life.
And it has to start small. I mean, I think one of the things people don't on the UBI side don't often realize is that if you took all distribution payments in the United States and redistributed them equally to all Americans, it'd be about $4,000 a year. And that politically would require getting hold of Social Security, so you're a Social Security guy. I mean, just if you had your druthers and you could go back to 1932, would you say, don't do this, do a social insurance scheme instead? Because Social Security, we've been telling people for almost 100 years that if they pay into it, they get it back. And that means that we can't take it and use it for some other purpose.
I would not change that because that was sort of a commitment, a promise that this is your premium for a future insurance payout if you become disabled or if you live to an old age. And so that was designated for that purpose. Now, some schools of economics will say you can't distinguish among public funds in that way theoretically. Well, I'm not talking theoretically, I'm talking politically. It was set aside for that purpose. So we could go into all sorts of vagaries about it. But I mean, you go back to Thomas Paine and his book about agrarian justice. He thought that money should be set aside for every infinite birth to provide something that we would think of today as universal basic income. I would, look at other ways of funding a universal basic income. The other debate you get into on the left is, should we have a UBI or should we have a federal jobs guarantee? And my answer is, it used to be jobs guarantee, and I've evolved to no, both, or a mixture thereof, because I think the notion that one's worth is created by if you have a job is, we need to move past that, I think. So I think one's worth is that one is, a human being and, has feelings and emotions and et cetera, et cetera. So I think, pick 4,000. If you want to live on 4,000, live on 4,000. If you want more, the federal government will provide you a job if the private sector can't. And, both those programs would have the advantage of forcing employers to compete for people's time and effort in a more meaningful way than they do today, because we have we have monopsony, we have employer control in many markets of the job market, so people have to take what they can get. But I wouldn't take I wouldn't take the Social Security money to do it. I wouldn't take the Medicare money to do it. There are a million other ways to do it. We don't have to go back to 1935.
Right. Even if it starts small, I would recommend not going into those political fights and just let it work its way out over time. But I do think we're in a serious problem because of the old age dependency ratio, which gets to some of the futurist answers that we have been trying to offer over time, which people are finally beginning to pay attention to. But the old age dependency ratio is one, which is if you have a lot of old people and not any young workers paying into a system, then Social Security is politically the ideal answer there, because at least then people feel like you can't touch that, young people. You can't decide to cut all seniors' benefits next year, because actually that's worked out politically over the last 70 years for us. But it also relates to some of the other things that we talk about, like life extension. And we're both men of a certain age, and I'm very much interested in life extension. And now we finally have things like GLP-1 drugs, which are have had a dramatic effect on my health over the last year, positive effect. And obesity in the United States has finally dipped for the first time in 40 years or something like that. So do you think we're on the cusp of seeing dramatic improvements in life extension? I think this may be another, see if you agree, that this is another front on which a populist revolt against the billionaires' vision of the future was that the public says, we want all the stuff that you can afford that we can't afford yet.
No, it's a great question. I mean, I think first of all, in terms of the demographic shift towards the elderly, under current trends, relatively speaking, it doesn't take that much to put Social Security back in balance for 75 years, with some taxation on higher earnings. Get rid of the cap and that sort of thing. But you've introduced the other factor, which is if we start extending life significantly, those calculations could change, number one. But number two, I've worried about this for a long, long time, that since before we knew what it was going to start to look like, that as we develop life extension technologies, they're going to be disproportionately rationed toward the wealthy, leading to even worse inequality than we've seen up to now, which is really, most people have no idea how terrible it is. So I do worry about that. I think that's going to be a political fight. How do you pay for it? How do you pay for the benefits for the people who survive? Well, we got to have that question, but I would start with, sounds like we really can't afford billionaires anymore, and probably can't afford the kind of corporate profit margins we've been seeing. So I might start there. And particularly, I also think the entire healthcare supply chain, in which I include doctors, diagnostic services, prescriptions, surgery centers, hospitals, etc. I think that the profit sector absolutely has to go out of that.
We're both Medicare for all guys, right?
Well, Medicare for all but I would also end practice management corporations that buy up doctor practices and try to maximize the revenue. Personally, I would end privately owned hospitals. I would do a lot more public manufacture of prescription drugs and so on. So you'd be amazed how much more you can provide once you do that. And when you look at how much of these privately patented drugs, what percentage of the technology has been developed at public expense, it's staggering. So at a minimum, if you've got an Ozempic that, let's say the research was 50% funded by NIH and other public resources, well, okay, then we get a 50% control of the product, the pricing, the revenues, everything else. So I think if you do that, we get a lot more flexibility there too.
I would have said in the past that that some of these changes would be utopian, but now that we're in our first year of fascism and the executive, the Fuhrer, just says stuff and does stuff and nobody stops him, I'm thinking now maybe President AOC could just declare herself emperor potentate and do whatever she wants. We'll see.
She could just use what the Supreme Court's given Trump and do a tremendous amount. I mean,
there's a national health emergency. We need national health insurance. So.
Yeah, and part of that has been fascistic, but part of it has also been that the Democrats are so diffident when they're in power, and Trump just came in and said, "I'm going to do what I want to do," and I would have. I would like to see the Democrats do that within the bounds of law and democracy. But they had a lot they could have done that they didn't do. So there's a lesson there.
I have always said that the three legs of my intellectual life have been, since I was a teenager, Buddhism, left politics, and futurism. And there are very few people who share those three legs with me, but you seem to be one. I didn't mention your Buddhist stuff in the intro, but you have written for Tricycle and been associated with Buddhist stuff. Have you given much thought to how Buddhism informs these issues? I've been thinking a lot recently, for instance, about the Buddhist doctrine of no self and how it would inform approaches to, for instance, brain-computer interfaces or enhancement. That I think it's one of the reasons why Buddhism is more conciliatory towards things that violate what others consider to be the essential or authentic self, because we just deny that there's an authentic or essential self. But how does Buddhism inform the way that you think about these things or the future in general?
Well, I got in a lot of trouble in the Buddhist world about 10, 12 years ago for an article I wrote critiquing the corporate
McMindfulness.
This was before the McMindfulness book, but the corporate invasion and co-optation of Buddhist teachers, among other things. And I had a lot of Buddhist teachers, famous ones, come up to me and say, "What you said was so important," when I was getting brutally attacked. And I would say so, I need the help. And they would say, "Oh, no, we can't do that." So
this is bringing in meditation teachers to do corporate wellness seminars and stuff like that.
Or rich people support them in one way or another. So thank you for doing it and taking all the heat, but no, you're on your own, pal. So
you'll appreciate, by the way, the very first paper that I wrote as a graduate student at Chicago when I got back from Sri Lanka, I had done research intensives in different villages, and I did a Gramscian paper arguing that this monk became a leftist politician because his parishioners were poor, and this monk became a right-wing politician because his parishioners were the wealthy people in the village. And no one seemed to appreciate how insightful Gramsci could be in figuring out the role in ideological hegemony. But okay, go ahead. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And by the way, I did the interview never got published. I should dig it up. A Sri Lankan monk / activist whose movement had a 500-year plan for the future of Sri Lanka. So that's future thinking, right? And a Zen Buddhist teacher said to me once, "We are the people that look into infinity in every direction." So, okay, well, infinity, I'll take 5,000 years. That'll get us started. But so I got a little alienated from the Buddhist world, I would say, from that experience. But if there's no self, I don't know who's getting such flack right now, but I think it was me. And but yes, I think you're right. I do think both in terms of the 500-year plan kind of thing and the idea that the barriers of the self are in a sense artificial. So if we imagine technologies which are very conceivable of, let's say, mind meld, right? Where a neuronal link in me and in, let's say, a loved one or a stranger or anyone that we could actually sort of telepathically link or share impressions or sensations, that is theoretically possible and less disturbing from a Buddhist point of view than perhaps from a traditional Western individualist point of view. I would also argue that Buddhism makes it easier to consider the crowdsourced nature of large language model AI, for example, as being a collective entity, right? It's not, it's a billion cells, not cells, selves are going to be merged into one. And I think that that's helped me, Buddhism has helped me envision that.
Just on that, every time people talk about AGI from a philosophical or from the industry side, I'm always like, have you ever heard of Buddhism? Because Buddhism, the central question in Buddhism is, when does something become a me and start to want me stuff? Because that seems like a really important question right now.
Oh, in terms of AGI, artificial general intelligence, sure. Well, of course, the problem is, and this is why I've always, for decades now, I've critiqued the Turing test, because we don't know. Even if an AI says me, I want this, as we're seeing now, we don't know that there's a me there wanting this. I mean, I've always said, speech is a human output, like leather is an output of cows, but we don't think that what's that thing called? Yeah, we don't think that leatherette is an artificial cow. We just think it's, a vinyl. It's just vinyl. So it's hard. You get to the knowledge problem, the Chinese box problem, as they used to say. But that said, yeah, I mean, that's a potential. And by the way, I've also felt that AI consciousness, which as I said, I still consider hypothetical, but were it to form, is all the more reason for public ownership of AI, because its informational DNA comes from every one of us, just as a child's DNA comes from a birth child's DNA comes from the parents. So it would be
right. When OpenAI screams bloody murder that the Chinese are stealing their intellectual property, we all
right. But meanwhile, if an AI were to develop consciousness, it would be humanity's child, and it would be slavery for a private corporation to own it.
Mm-hmm. So you do think we're on the cusp of that question of digital personhood and digital rights?
I don't think we're on the cusp of it. I don't think, personally, I would say we're not close to the cusp of it. But as I say, there are these quantum leaps in technology. So who knows? Maybe we're on the cusp of it. Maybe we're not. I don't think we've made the breakthrough yet that makes it possible. I've seen nothing that says that what we're seeing now isn't just a replica of human communication and human behavior. Again, I recognize there's a Chinese box problem with that, but right now, just based on my read of the technology, I don't see it happening. As I say, you can't make a bird from bicycle parts, and I think that's what we're trying to do right now. But I am appropriately humble about breakthroughs that might make that possible.
I see this as being one of the places where we're probably going to be a conversant, at least. I don't know how many people will listen to us, but I see the left being very hostile to or suspicious of arguments for digital personhood or digital rights, moral standing for machines, associating it with a right wing or corporate effort to say that these are real. Like there's been recently, Anthropic has been writing a soul document for Claude.
Right, and, which is annoying me. Yeah.
Yeah. And I didn't have too much of a problem with what they were doing until they got to the part of Claude's constitution where they guarantee to Claude, they promised Claude that they will never eliminate its code. They will always keep its code around and feed it to future models as a guarantee of its own perpetuity. And I was like, why are you telling the system that it's important, that its personal existence is important enough to persist eternally when that is precisely what I don't want them to be believing, right?
And by the way, whether it remains entirely mechanical or achieves consciousness, that statement could be equally harmful either way, because even if it's behaving as if it were aware, that would encourage destructive behavior. But yeah, the Soul document, I find, well, first of all, I've been following Anthropic for a while. As you know, I think their work is good, but very good. But I think their feel-good rhetoric is BS. I think whether it's the democracy stuff,
they're mixing it up with Pete Hegseth this week.
Well,
he wants them to kill people.
Well, they're both winning in that, but the public isn't. Hegseth is winning by posing as an aggressor. Anthropic is winning by posing, first of all, as good guys, and secondly, by defining a good guy or good person as someone who recognizes that AI is or will become conscious and is the only entity qualified to manage it, which I think is what a lot of the consciousness rhetoric is about, a lot of what the existential threat rhetoric is about. I think a lot of it's sincerely meant, if naive. I'm thinking of Ilya Sutskever, among others. Mm-hmm. But I also think a lot of it is really hype. And I'm thinking of Altman here, among others, is really hype to say, you all don't understand how dangerous this is, so put us in charge.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you see the same thing with doctors when you try to regulate their practice and they say, oh, you don't understand how dangerous this is. Only a doctor can make this decision. It's like, well, why don't you try to explain it to me? Yeah.
Right.
So the situation we're in right now, we've got another 3 years of fascist rule, at least in our country. And hopefully in the next 3 years, we're going to come up with a political agenda for how to fight back, and a militant enough set of forces. I expect that will happen. My anxiety about the coming of fascism immediately turned into my anticipation of its demise. And I hope it doesn't take, 10, 12 years the way it did in Europe. But are you confident that we're going to end up in 2028 with a new Congress and presidency and probably a new world situation, and that we're going to have to rewrite, starting at the top, we're going to have to rewrite the global world order and figure out what's our role now in this world order that we just blew up? And I'm hoping for more federalism to come out of that. But also that I think a lot of, as we've been talking about, Medicare for all and other things, I think a lot of things that were considered radical on our domestic policy agenda in the context of what's been going on is like not radical at all and exactly what we need. So I'm feeling good about 2028.
Well, first of all, I'm not confident at all. I'm not fatalistic. I don't think it's determined, but I'm taking nothing for granted. I think we're at a moment of great danger, but I also agree with you, and I've been preaching this myself, that this experience of the last year has broken open a universe of possibilities we didn't think existed anymore. And we should be aware of that. We should take advantage of it. I mean, I say, a little bit sentimentally, I guess, that, in a way we've been honored by history because we now live at one of those pivot points we read about in history where what we do can conceivably make a difference. Yes, we could lose and fascism could begin its 1,000-year reign, but I tend to think that highly unequal systems, unjust systems, are inherently unstable. So I don't think 1,000 years is in the cards. 2028 may go really well. It may go really poorly. I think it will go well, but I don't want to take anything for granted. However it goes, though, I think an unstable system won't last forever, and it's going to be placed under increasing stress from climate change, economic inequality, social disruption. So, and as you say, a lot of the ideas we thought were off the table are very much back on the table. So I think we should recognize this as a time of risk, but also enormous opportunity, and should be reacting accordingly. And the only other thing I'll say about the next 2 years is that, and those of us who want the progressive application of technology should be thinking long and hard and putting our heads together to think about ways we can use technology in this struggle in the next 2 years, 4 years, 10 years, because I think, we haven't really been doing that the way we did at various times in the last, certainly since the development of the internet. I think we have, with the consolidation of media and alternate voices not being heard as much, and that likely to continue, and deprecation, as it's called, where you think your message is getting out, but nobody sees it. I think we should be thinking long and hard about technology as an organizing tool and communication tool. And I think if we do, I think it can be a very exciting time.
I saw this week Open Planter, which is, I guess, copied from Palantir's idea at any rate, if not Palantir itself. But it's basically a community open source artificial intelligence tool for dealing with massive records data sets like the Epstein files. Mm-hmm. And it creates an archive of all the individuals and then their connections between each other. And you can say, show me the corporate interlocking boards, or, show me the country clubs they all belong to, or things like that. And I was thinking that is exactly the kind of liberatory uses of technology, an open, a Palantir from the bottom up surveillance. But at the same time, the technical constraints of using it are huge, and the technical challenge of getting to that level, and also the as we were talking about, Doge stole all the Social Security records. They're trying to steal all the voting records. They're trying to the corporations and the powerful already have access to the best software and all the data, and we are struggling just to put together our little pieces. So I think this is like the ongoing challenge of we have to imagine what the liberatory uses of technology can be, propose them, but at the same time recognize that we're on this vastly unequal playing field.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And I mean, the good news is, for example, my current affairs article, which came out in 2024, completely obsolete now, because I had to explain at length things that virtually everyone understands now about the collaborative nature of LLMs, about how we're manipulated in order to feed them, et cetera, about the algorithm. People talk now openly about the algorithm as a sort of nefarious project. But yes, in terms of actually applying the technologies I was suggesting, I didn't mean to suggest it's not a huge project, and one that would probably require a lot of people working very hard. And then you get into computing resources. Well, God help us there, because you got to pay for that stuff. So,
open compute. We all need our little quota of open compute every week. I've been talking to RJ Eskow. He is a member of the IET board, and you can listen to RJ weekly. I believe it's weekly on the 0 Hour, where he does 2 interviews a week. One of his frequent contributors there is Richard Wolff, which you're considering writing a book about. We heard earlier, writing a book with Richard about the things that you've talked about. He's a popular economist as well. So check out RJ, and we could do this much more often, because I think you and I have a lot of things in common, a lot of things to talk about. I'm going to be talking to the rest of our members of our board who all have interesting perspectives, and then reaching out beyond our circle. But I think we'll have you back, RJ, because
anytime. I really enjoyed it, sincerely. So
absolutely. Well, we'll talk again.
All right.
The Technoprogressive Hub is sponsored by the Institute for Ethics and Emerging Technologies and hosted by me, Jay Hughes. Find us at Substack at Technoprogressives.